It is 6 o'clock. I'm calling this meeting of the Mazomanie Village Board to order. The meeting was properly posted on February 8th, amended on February 11th. Roll call.
Harrop.
Here.
Beal.
Here.
Dearson.
Here.
Mickelson. Sander.
Here.
Schlamp.
Here.
Springstead.
Here.
We have a quorum, so we will conduct business. Item 4, additions or corrections to the agenda. And I'd like to suggest that as we get into old business, items 1 and 2, we take both of those together because they're so closely related.
I'll make a motion to do that.
Motion by Jerry to approve the agenda. Second?
Second.
Jeff? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion is carried. Item 6, appearances and significant correspondence. If anyone has anything they'd like to talk about that is not on the agenda.
You didn't do minutes.
Oh, shoot, I'm sorry, 5 minutes. I could have taken it out of order, folks. All right, I'm sorry. Minutes of the previous meeting, January 22nd.
Motion approved.
Motion by Jeff. Second. By Les. Discussion.
In item 3, where it says 7 proposed properties, 7 homes, shouldn't that be 8?
It was talked all through the whole meeting. It was 7 until it came to the motion, and it was brought out that it was 8.
But that doesn't affect the motion.
No.
Further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. That motion is carried. Now item 6. If anyone wants to discuss anything other than what's on the agenda, now is the time. Pete, and I'm going to limit you to 3 minutes.
I don't need that.
All right. That's the first.
Thank you, Gary. It's getting longer. I just want to give a shout out to the plow drivers. They've done a really nice job.
Yes, they have. Thank you, Pete.
Who else wants something?
Yeah. Item 7, Village President Report. I don't have a report, but we're going to change the way that our meetings are conducted, and it starts tonight. The last meeting we had, and we're dealing with an emotional issue this evening with potential buyouts of homes in the floodway, and this isn't going to turn into a circus or a fracas like it almost did last time. So when we get to old business, items 1 and 2, we have Dale Clemmy with us this evening. He's going to speak and talk about the process of flood mitigation, where we are, what will take place from this point on. Brian Berquist, our village engineer, cannot be here this evening. He's representing another client, so he's issued a written report with his recommendations. I'll read that so that everybody can hear that. Then we're going to open it to public comment. Anyone that wishes to speak on the flood mitigation issue or the buyout program can do so. You are limited to 3 minutes. One time, 3 minutes maximum. After that, public comment ceases, and it's board discussion only. Question? Yep.
So you're leaving no room for follow-up comments?
Public comment.
When we make our comments,
Public.
I assume the board will have, their own comments. There's no room for follow-up.
There is no follow-up.
Seems pretty censored.
You know what? When I accepted this position, I was surprised that open meeting laws do not require public comment. Nothing. We can conduct a meeting without public input. I won't read Wisconsin statutes, but I'll read what the League of Wisconsin Municipalities has written, because it's easier to understand for me. The open meeting law is concerned only with the public's right to be present at a meeting of a governmental body. It does not imply a right of the public to participate in the conduct of government business or to speak at meetings. Therefore, a governmental body may prohibit the public from speaking or set conditions, such as limiting the amount of time a member of the public has to address the governing body. And board members, we will follow this same procedure in future meetings.
And that's the way we want to conduct business. Our constituents are here, that's who we
Our
represent.
constituents are here and they're going to have a chance to speak.
But they don't have
But
a
it is not,
response to respond
it is
to.
not going to turn into the circus it almost did last time, Natalie.
I disagree, that was an open conversation.
You can disagree all you want.
So that doesn't take a vote by the board, you can just dictate that?
This is in Wisconsin statutes, but I can take a sense of the board. Does anyone disagree with what I just said, other than
I don't think
Natalie?
it's limits to what you can say. I mean, you can say that.
Jeff, we aren't discussing anything.
Okay.
Other than Natalie, does anyone disagree? That's the way this meeting is going to be conducted, according to Wisconsin statutes. All right, item 8, village administrator report.
You have a written report in front of you. Nothing additional to add right now unless there's questions or any comments.
This is something that, like, if it's not gonna be produced to the public that's present, can we read this report as well to them so that they're not just like, oh, that's another report, what was even in it?
We can read it.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it or do you want to read it, Gary?
Go ahead.
All right. Excuse me. Highlights from 1/18/19 to 2/8/19. Working on FEMA projects has been very time consuming. We are in the middle of sorting through all of our records, receipts, and photos to get them organized. I also been filling out the detailed forms from FEMA for each damage category. Our FEMA program manager has very timely and helpful answers for any questions or clarifications we run into as we wade through this process. We are very close to finishing several categories and sending them to our program manager for editing. One more month and we should be finished with this part. We have also been working on a proposed FEMA buyout program for properties. I have talked to all 8 property owners that were identified by the board at the last meeting. 7 were interested in the program and met with Gary and I to discuss it further. All 7 are planning on meeting with Dale Clemmy to discuss details and preliminary paperwork. Once we send in our final paperwork, FEMA will look through each of these individually to approve or deny each. In November, FEMA received preliminary requests for $20 million. They have $10 million to spend. There is no guarantee that will be funded for all of our requests. I am still researching pole attachments and excavation ordinances. I took advantage of talking to Anita Galucci at the MWPG meeting to get more insight about this. I should have something soon for our ordinance committee to look over. Tara is still working with me on utility building training. We are almost through the first full cycle. We had our new server and Tara's new computer installed. We are still working through some issues. The process went a lot longer than what was originally thought. I attended Ayler's annual public finance seminar for 2 days. It is always filled with a wealth of information that can be applied to our village. We finished fixing any possible website security issues. Our website software is also updated. A few bugs are still being worked out from the update. I worked with Kathy Yasik on posting for lifeguards, both in the paper and on our website. The deadline for applications is February 20th. Bill Cole and I worked on our proposed agreement with Bug Tussle for a new cell tower. They now have the red line lease and our reasoning behind the requested amount for rent.
Questions of Peter? Hearing none, move on to item 9, deputy in charge report. Josh.
Good evening. First start by introducing Deputy Kyle Keller.
Kyle.
Second shift Mazomanie deputy replacing myself. He's here for the remainder now. Got the numbers in front of you there, sorry they're a little late. Lower call volume, as usually happens in the winter months, including January. Higher accidents, this kind of happens with the weather. The drug investigation on there was a minor one, we're just going to try to stop some minor drugs. Nothing really else stands out in numbers for me. Do you have any questions on any of them?
Kyle, it's good to have you.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Maybe you can make the report more interesting in the future.
We might have to bring this up. Again, happy to be here, maybe with me and Nate for the next few days. Again, thank you for letting me work out here for a few years.
Welcome.
I really enjoyed it.
Josh,
Thank
we've
you.
enjoyed having you too.
Thank you.
Okay, items 10, 11, 12, 13, our second board meeting of the month. Lake Marion update, still have water. Anything else, Mark?
No, nothing.
Item 15, update on Mazo 2020 committee. That is in your packet. Item 16, violations of property ordinance.
No new violations.
Item 17, flood update other than what we're discussing tonight.
Nothing. I think I covered it in either my report or we're going to be talking about tonight.
I have a couple of questions about that. So who is technically our zoning administrator for that? Is that Tracy, or have we hired on Town and Country to do that?
Tracy is the zoning administrator, and I'm meeting him tomorrow morning.
And he takes care of the flood zone and everything?
We're going to hash that out.
Okay, because he's the one that signed off on the SDE
Yeah.
assessment, so
Yeah.
I'm just wondering who exactly is in charge of that?
Ostensibly Tracy, but I know there are questions, and that's why I'm meeting with him.
And then my second question regarding flood update, as far as the appeals process, now, have we set precedents with the Van Horn residents? If they bring in their general contractor estimates and they are above, say, what we have them down for, is that just a change that we can make, or are they still required to go through that appeals process?
At that point, do you mind if I?
No,
Okay.
please.
At that point, there's no appeals process. What it is we have been saying all along from the very beginning, is if they want to dispute it, if they have a contractor's estimate, a licensed contractor in the state of Wisconsin, which is what we were told by FEMA, that they could do that we could look at that and reevaluate their estimate.
Actually,
And-
Tracy could look at it.
Well, yes, we meaning the village, but
Right.
Tracy was the one that looked at the one that the Van Horn brought in, but Denise brought in and looked at it and agreed with it and adjusted the SDE to read accordingly from that.
So if they're going for substantial damage, bring in the contractor's estimates, and it goes through Tracy, there's no reason for them to go through an official appeals process.
Right, and that's what we have been told by FEMA, and that's what we've been saying from day one, is that we needed that first, and we could be able to adjust. But there's no guarantee that they bring it in and it's going to be adjusted. Tracy would have to look at it to make sure that all the concerns that we have in our inspection are addressed in that, and legitimately so.
Now, I had communication with, I'm sorry.
As far as what, since I know now that you're talking about my home, what exactly are you talking about?
When you, remember we had that meeting about the substantial damage, you guys were substantial damage, you couldn't repair your home.
Right, for some reason you guys thought that, and I was told by many people it wasn't, and I got an attorney, and as soon as I gave you the papers to file the appeal, all of a sudden my numbers miraculously dropped.
No, they didn't miraculously drop. They did. I told you in that meeting that we had, if you bring in if you have a contractor saying licensed, and that's what your lawyer asked to do, and that's what you did then. That's all I got from him was this, a request to have an appeal, and he also brought that paperwork in, and I talked to him because he asked to talk to me, and I said, we'll look at this first before anything.
Okay.
So that's why in the numbers there, because you had a licensed contractor from the state of Wisconsin, that's why your numbers dropped. There wasn't anything that the lawyer did or anything. We had no contact with him, with the exception of that he had sent us that information that you had gotten him, or he had gotten for you.
Okay, so what is the issue now going on with my home then?
There is no
There
issue.
is no issue. Not that I
There is
know of.
no issue. Natalie's asking why you were all of a sudden granted that.
No, I guess I was looking at something that's the opposite situation, and they want to be substantially damaged, and
I've had someone ask that, and I've said bring in
I
a
just wanna
contractor and
make
we can look at it, and they haven't yet.
because
and that was a
we
while
have
ago.
the zoning board of appeals, and I know we had talked about that, having to have alternates if they were, flooded, et cetera. I just want to make sure that it's opposite circumstances, but in the same case, if they were to bring in the contractor's estimates, that they wouldn't have to go through that formal appeals process. It would just go through Tracy.
Unless Tracy looks at it and disagrees with it, and we stick with our original numbers, then they'd have to go through an appeals process.
Okay.
Well, see, and that's another thing I wanted to bring up. I'm glad that this was brought up because I had tried to contact Tracy himself several times before contacting my attorney to have him come inspect my home before, when I had Heritage Movers already look at it, said that it was 100% safe to lift my home. The structure of it was completely fine. Does not know why that my numbers were so high. And Tracy did not return any of my phone calls. And he's supposed to be the building inspector, and I understand at that time everything was chaotic and up in the air, whatnot. But this village is supposed to be working together. I got more help from people that I have never met before in my life.
Okay, I'm meeting with Tracy tomorrow. I will bring this up as part of it, but again, I'm going to emphasize public comment is structured. No participation by the public until it's public comment time. Okay, but I'll talk with Tracy on that, Denise.
And Peter, one other thing. So I've had some contact with Michelle and saying that she wants to sit down and go over the substantial damage estimates. Is that true?
Yeah.
And will the village have to take on doing additional assessments for outbuildings? Have you talked to her about that at all?
I haven't talked to her about it. I talked to Tylon McGee about it. And what she said is different than what Michelle said. So when she comes here to talk with us, that's one of the things I want to ask her about.
No, she's coming here to talk about discrepancies, or what exactly is the
I'm not sure exactly.
basis of her?
It's from what I gather, it's the same thing that Tylon McGee came out here. She's from FEMA, and Michelle's staff is the FEMA coordinator for the DNR. So they both have FEMA ties, but Michelle actually works for the Wisconsin DNR. And they just want to come out, they want to check our numbers against other numbers that they have for insurance. They had questions about properties that weren't inspected, and then I showed them that they weren't in the floodplain, and they were fine with that. So that's all I know, is just a follow-up to make sure that they understand all of our numbers.
And who will all be at that meeting?
Tracy and I.
Okay, and not like Steve, who took care of the assessments, or Janine that inputted them, or?
As far as I know, it's not going to get that detailed, and so we were just going to do it between the two of us and Michelle. I mean, she asked for me, so that's why we were going to do that.
Any further questions on flood update? If not, we're going to move into old business, and we are taking items 1, report of status on participants in flood buyout program, and 2, discussion of FEMA hazard mitigation grant program as one item. We're going to start with Dale Clemmy, our flood consultant from Prairie du Chien. Yeah, come on, stand up. And
very good. Good evening, everybody. It seems like flooding is become a controversial subject in every community, most communities I work with. And part of it is the fact that it's not anticipated, and when it does happen, it is more devastating than what you imagine it to be. I bought property in the floodplain when I first moved to Prairie du Chien 40-some years ago. Only because I was fresh out of school, I had very little money, but I had the GI Bill, so I bought the cheapest house I could find. And so for $500 down, I bought a piece of property in the floodplain. I realized then, I knew then, the fact that you were at risk, but quite frankly, the economics of the situation at the time suggested that that's a risk that I was willing to take. I'm fortunate in that I have not had experienced flood damage to the property in the 40-some years that I've owned it. For many of you, this is the first time in 40-some years, perhaps, that you've experienced damage, actual damage to your property. So it can happen to anyone at any time, as we know, and not only if you're in the floodplain, but if you're near the floodplain, by the record floods that we've experienced here recently. And the cost of owning property in the floodplain has increased over time because of the fact that the federal government is increasing the flood insurance rates so that they can help to cover the claims that constantly are put before them, not only for flooding but hurricanes and everything, all the natural disasters that are befalling us. And then and that becomes an issue of money. And part of that issue of money is some of the frustration and anxiety, perhaps, that is part of in the room here tonight. After the floods in Wisconsin this past summer, both in the Kickapoo Valley, up in Vernon County, here in Dane County, because the size of the damage, the amount of damage, we had a presidential declaration, finally and eventually. And because of that, it made additional monies available to those counties for flood mitigation. And that's sort of what the topic of discussion is, how that money be spent or who's going to participate in that. And back in November, FEMA said to all those communities that were flood affected, tell us what you would like to have for money and where you would spend it for flood mitigation if in fact we can fund you. Communities such as Mazomanie submitted pre-applications, some for buyouts of properties, and some for actual elevation of properties, and some funding for relocation, physically picking up houses and moving them to a safe place out of the floodplain. And if the magnitude of the damage weren't so great, there would have been enough money to perhaps address all of those activities. But there wasn't. The state received $50-some million in requests for funding from all of the communities to help with flood mitigation. 20 million of that was for buyouts alone. The state was awarded, FEMA allocated to the state of Wisconsin only $10 million. And that is a percent of the total damage that was sustained in that presidentially declared area. So some percentage applied to that, and $10 million is what is allocated to Wisconsin. So with that in mind, FEMA said, all right, everybody, and you got a letter. Thanks for your application to elevate properties, but we aren't going to even consider. Thanks for your application to relocate properties, but we aren't even going to consider. Thanks for your application to buy out properties, but we aren't able to consider all of those. We're going to have to prioritize those. And they said, and you can prioritize those in the final application, which is due at the end of March. And they said, here is how we're going to look at the prioritization when the applications come in. Properties damaged, substantially damaged in the floodway will be given priority. Other properties in the floodway will be given second priority. We will give priority to properties in the floodplain, fringe or way, that were damaged. Not necessarily substantially damaged, but were damaged. And then we'll also give some, beyond that, then we'll give some consideration to properties that have experienced repetitive loss, repetitive damage over a period of time, 3 different times they were damaged in the course of time. If you can prove that from a benefit cost analysis, it makes sense for the government to put money into the acquisition of those properties. So while there might be some desire to buy all of the properties that were in the pre-application, it's just not going to fly. So the application that's put together needs to look at the priorities that FEMA is going to consider, so that in fact what we submit is going to be fundable. Along with that is the fact that 12.5% of the total project cost has to come from a local source, a non-federal source. So that means 12.5% of the cost of the appraiser, the cost of the acquisition, the cost of the closing, the legal fees associated with that, the cost of any relocation of tenants, if there are any, and the cost of demolition site restoration. 12.5% of all of that will not be paid for by the grant. So if the village has deep pockets, that 12.5% wouldn't be an issue. But if in fact you have budget issues already because of constraints placed upon you by the state for how you can tax and everything else, then in fact that needs to be taken into consideration as well. And there are ways that we can find other places for this 12.5%. In most communities, we look at community development block grant, CDBG, but in Dane County, because you're entitlement county, you're part of the Madison area, you can't apply as a community for that CDBG money. But 99% of the communities we work with otherwise use that money for their local match. So we need to be a little more creative here if in fact we're going to rely upon something other than the general coffers to pay for that 12.5%. And some of that is if people are substantially damaged, homes are substantially damaged, and they're included in the buyout list, and they have flood insurance, then we would ask that those homeowners, if there are any such cases, that those property owners assign their what's called increased cost of compliance, ICC, to the village, and that money then can be used to pay for the demolition of the property after it's acquired, and that cost then can be part of your 12.5%. And there are other ways that we're trying to figure out that might cover that 12.5%, but without access to that community development block grant, because you're in Dane County, it really gets tough. Which again makes that group that are included in acquisition a little more limited and restricted. And I would say this is an observation of the flood recovery work that I've been doing since 1977. Seems like a long time. That this whole flood mitigation is a process. It's not something that's going to happen in this one application, one fell swoop. And it consists of a number of activities. In some communities, it includes channel maintenance, making sure there's debris out of the channel so that you have carrying capacity within the channel to take the water. Some communities construct reservoirs upstream in order to hold water. That may not be practical given the volume of water you experienced here. That's an engineering decision down the road. The funding for that is somewhere down the road. For some it might be not buying out properties, but it might be elevating the properties to flood protection elevation. Getting utilities out of the basement, just as some have done. And that preserves the tax base and prefers utility users, but also affords flood protection. There are programs out there that pop up on occasion that provide assistance to property owners to do just that in the form of a grant. It's not 100%, but it could be 50% or some other amount. But my point is that this whole issue of flood mitigation is an ongoing process. I can speak from what brought me to Prairie du Chien. It was a flood mitigation project of acquiring 128 properties out of the floodway. And it was over time, over 20 years, and it continues yet today, that when we find money that is from some source that pops up to assist the homeowners, residential properties with the floodproof to elevate their house, we apply for that money. We jump on that because we know there's need there, and that's just one more step toward 100% flood mitigation in that community flood protection. And I would ask that you consider this as a long-term process based upon when the funding becomes available and when the details of your mitigation strategy become more crystallized, so to speak. There are funding sources available. I'll just touch on a couple of them. The DNR has what's called municipal flood control grants. You villages, counties, cities can apply for those. It used to be every year, then a few years ago they changed it to every 2 years. It used to be 75% as a grant, now it's 50% a grant. Maybe with a different administration, they'll go back to how it was before, so that there's incentive for people to participate. But this is money that can be, communities can apply for to either buy out additional properties or to make available to property owners as a grant, 50% as a grant, to elevate the house, bring utilities up, and do and bring it into compliance with the floodplain ordinance by floodproofing. Also money available to help people pick up their homes and move it to a different location in the community out of the floodplain. There is frequently other FEMA monies available that communities can apply for on an annual basis, so that you compete nationally with your proposed project. And that primarily is for additional buyout money. So I guess the bottom line here is that even though you may not have as many properties on the buyout list as you would like to have, you may not be able to afford any more than that right now, but there are opportunities constantly out there to apply for money and deal with another buyout here, another buyout there, as that money becomes available and it's affordable to you. So it's this is a marathon, not a sprint.
Quick question. Sorry. Did you have to have so many houses to apply for the FEMA grants, for the buyouts or anything?
No.
No. Okay.
It's not the number of houses. It's how the houses rank in the priority of how the FEMA is going to fund.
Okay.
Floodways priority, substantial damages priority, and then flood fringe, that has where property has been damaged. It'll do 1 or it'll do 20 if in fact it meets that criteria.
No.
Dale, quick question on that too. How many properties went into the pre-approval that you talked about? That was in the fall maybe?
In the pre-app?
Yeah, where they came up with which allowed them to come up with that 20 million, 10 million.
You mean just in Mazomanie or?
Yeah.
Just here?
Yeah.
One, two, three, four, 5, 6. We have 8 for elevation, floodproofing by elevation. I don't know that I have the acquisition one here. Do you recall, Peter, how many?
It was 7 or 8.
7 or 8 in that original, yeah.
Why so few in the pre-approval? There was many homes damaged that are in the flood.
We had to have this done in less than a week when they told us they had that preliminary in, so we just were guessing on our own.
And just maybe this will help with that. Here's how I have seen this process work. So you submit an application to FEMA, and you have on this list the properties that meet their criteria. And they will say, all right, congratulations, here's a contract, go ahead and deal with these 8 properties at a total budget of X number of dollars. It's voluntary up until the point that the person accepts the money, homeowner accepts the money and signs the deed. They could pull out. They could say, I don't like this appraisal, I don't like this process. I'll take my chances where I am, and I'm not going to do it. Fine, nobody can force you. But at that point, we have frequently gone to FEMA and said, this property, this address is no longer in the project. We would like to instead include or add another property that maybe wasn't on the original list, but does meet the criteria that would have ranked as a fundable otherwise. So what we're applying for here are a number of properties, but in fact that has the potential to change. In fact, others want to come in if someone wants to go out, they meet the criteria and it fits within the budget.
Can the actual application have more than what the pre-approval had on it?
Yes. But they aren't going to be funded unless they do meet that, some of those criteria, right?
Could we pay the 12% ourselves? Is that an option?
Can you?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you'd be 12.5%. The 12.5%. Actually, we have one community that is that has no access to the 12.5%. And they're asking the commercial properties, there's 3 commercial properties, to pay not only 12.5% of the, pay 12.5% less of the appraisal, but also to escrow 12.5% of the demo cost and 12.5% of the appraisal cost and everything else that goes with it. I mean, that begins to be pretty costly to participate in a project. But that is possible.
Dale, I have a question.
Yes.
So when you're saying that this could be offered to somebody else if one of these 8 participants choose not to do it, how do they preserve their spot? Do they need to be included? Does this list B need to be included on that initial application?
No.
So that would just be the village's alternates.
Right, the village would make that decision. If in fact someone drops out, the village could say, all right, we're done. We'll just go with 6. Or they could say, hey, we have another one that really would meet the criteria, funding criteria, and we think should be added. And then that would be presented to FEMA and say, we want to replace this address with that address.
Okay. And then one other question with that. So then FEMA pays, ultimately does the FEMA pay the village out a lump sum of money, and then the village has the sole responsibility of allocating that, or FEMA oversees that entire process?
The village will incur the cost. They will pay the fee of the appraisal. They will do the closing. They will pay the homeowner the money out of the village's money or village borrowed money. And then once the acquisition is complete or the appraisal project is complete and the appraiser is paid, the homeowner is paid, a check is issued, the front and back of the canceled check, the documentation of the closing, everything else needs to be submitted to FEMA. Wisconsin Emergency Management, actually WEM, who's FEMA's agent in the state, and then they will send a check back to the village for 87.5% of what invoices, costs incurred that they think are legitimate. So you don't get it up front. You're going to have to finance the project, and that's why we like to harangue the state to give us some quick turnaround time here, because villages can't afford to have a lot of money hanging out there.
Then you hope they accept everything.
That's right. And in fact, once you've been around the block a few times, you know how to make sure
you might get 60% back.
No, that you. I expect 87.5% on everything we do because I know what they're looking for.
Okay.
No, I just
and we do get it.
Devil's advocate. Does it make sense to ask for more, assuming they're not going to award the full amount? I mean, you said that there's 20 million asked, but only 10 million.
They're going to award. They're going to award the full amount that you ask for in the application. They may fund fewer applications, but they aren't going to go to the community and say, we're only going to give you 75% of what you asked for. Now, they might go through the properties and say, you submitted a request for 7 properties. I can buy 6 of those. But you got one of them in here that I don't think meets our priority criteria. And you've estimated on your total budget X number of dollars is for this parcel. So we're going to fund 6. We're going to give you the estimated budget that you have had to deal with those 6. So they will review all of the properties that you're asking to be included to make sure they meet their criteria. So you can't slip someone in who's not in the floodplain or slip someone in who hasn't been damaged.
Can I ask you a question? You were at my house today.
I was.
So you've seen that I had my house raised.
Yes.
And I was offered to be on the buyout.
Yes.
That's up in the air with everything. But there is other people that should be on that list that have not been offered to be on the buyout list. Now, why is that? And
We'll address that
That's,
in,
that's, A, that's not my decision. And B, it may be that they don't meet the criteria.
okay.
Or C, the village may not have the 12.5% to expand that list any further. I don't know, could be any one of those. I mean, you can only spend the money you got or you can afford, right?
Right.
and the answer is going to be in Brian Berquist's report, which I'll read next. More questions for Dale, as long as he's here. Steve?
Yeah, real quick. So you feel like, based on the criteria, the properties we have on the list, you think we'll get fully funded for those 8?
I think those that are on the list, if the owners wish to participate, are someone asked me the same question today. I was visiting in 5 of those households. And I said I'm 98% certain that it will be funded.
So do you feel like if we had a lot of properties that maybe don't meet the criteria, that it might actually hurt our application? Or is that not the case? Would they just look at it a little differently?
I don't know that it would hurt the application, but when you get off, when you even the third step on that criteria, in the application, you need to provide a benefit cost analysis on that particular property if it doesn't meet one of the criteria. And the benefit cost analysis you have to show 3 different flood events, separate flood events, where that property has incurred damage, and you have to document the amount of damage that property had.
That had been documented through FEMA previously, or just
flood insurance,
or just some receipts from contractors that did work?
Flood insurance, FEMA. There would have to be some documentation that the structure actually had damage, so it wasn't just the contractor's bill to finish off a basement that wasn't finished before, but it had nothing to do with the flood. You're going to have to hang your hat on something pretty decent here. That in fact there was 3 separate flood events to show repetitive loss, and that from a benefit cost analysis, it makes sense for the government to give the village money to buy that property.
I know a lot of mortgage companies have the rules that if your property is substantially damaged over $20,000, if your check amount is that, they require that they hang onto the money, so they wouldn't be able to. We wouldn't be able to like, oh, well, I can, do the 12.5% for my property, elevation, whatever, because they control then the divvy part because they have a vested interest in the property as well. So it's no longer my money, it becomes their money.
Well, the checks are made out to the homeowner and the bank.
Right.
Right.
And they request that they have control over it.
Right.
Because of their vested interest in the substantial.
I think it depends on how understanding your bank is, and how maybe how local your bank is. What I've seen is these faraway lenders tend not to care, but they want their money. Versus a local bank that understands the situation might say, it makes sense. I know. What's your name? I know Michelle. I know the situation. It makes, she has a good plan. I think it makes sense to allow her to put this money back into the house and further protect it so she has a nice place to be. But a faraway bank might say, I don't care about Michelle, I just want my money.
And it even says in the adjuster's statement that the house will not survive an elevation. But the mortgage company does not care, they just want their insurance check.
Well, that's right, except looking at a different bank.
Another question. So the bar to pass to be included for FEMA's consideration is within the floodway and considerably damaged, or within the flood fringe and considerably damaged, and what counts as considerably damaged to you with that determination?
Any property in the floodway, whether substantially damaged or not, would be a high priority. Okay. Because FEMA has a strong desire to eliminate properties in the floodway. And that's mainly because they don't want to come back and pay flood damage, or the insurance policy, flood insurance doesn't want to come back and customer pay a claim. So if you're a floodway, and you've applied, you want to participate, you're probably in.
Right, so people would look at that without too much scrutiny, say, you're in the floodway.
You're in the floodway, you had
pass
some
muster.
damage.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
here's a pass.
but first you have to get your property on the list.
On that list of what?
On the file list. Right.
Well,
If you're on there, you can prove you're in the floodway, that would pass muster with FEMA.
if you had damage, and you had incurred some damage, you would have a high probability of being funded, I think.
He's unique. He's not. He got pulled out of the floodway a year and a half ago.
Yeah, I carried flood insurance for the better part of a decade in the floodway. I'm in the process of getting a certificate from Tony Walker, did our neighbors.
What you mean floodway or floodplain?
Floodway, we carried.
Because you have flood insurance.
He's out of the floodplain.
Oh, because you have that flood insurance whether you're in floodway or flood fringe. But you only don't need it if you're not in the floodplain.
So we've got, you know.
We were just taken out last year.
Okay.
And FEMA
Just
told
so we understand this, I don't want to belabor this. We have a floodplain.
I can answer the question that you're going to ask. So,
I'm not asking a question.
okay.
So there can't be an answer. So you got the floodplain. If you're in the floodplain, you have a mortgage, you got to have flood insurance. The floodplain is divided into the floodway, which is closest to the flow of water, velocity, and again, the letter's going to talk about that. And then you have the flood fringe, which is the difference from the floodway to the edge of the floodplain is the flood fringe. So you weren't probably taken out of the floodway, you were probably taken out of the floodplain.
I'm not sure. Tony
Yeah,
Walker
they sent
said
us a
with
letter saying we no longer required insurance.
a high degree of certainty that we would fall within the floodway, having done an assessment on our neighboring property, which is included in the.
Yeah, he's pretty certain that they were wrong when they redid the maps and that he can prove that our elevation.
It would be right next to the other Curtis Street property that you.
But right now, you're not in the floodplain. And with the application on every property, we need to have a pinpoint where that house is and where's your floodplain line. If you aren't in the floodplain, then you're going to have that benefit cost analysis, repetitive loss, in order to support funding.
And an elevation certificate would cover that.
An elevation certificate is going to tell you how high your first floor is and how high the ground is around your house. I mean, anybody can get an elevation certificate, and those in the, or near the floodplain probably should. So it's a good thing you are. That's going to, but that might necessarily not change the floodplain map. I don't know why that was modified to take you out initially, Phil. In fact, your house is at.
So I could have an elevation certificate that says I'm below base flood elevation, and the map shows that whatever line on the map shows some, this is where the floodway is, even though that would not necessarily mean.
It wouldn't be proof positive. It would make a compelling case, but I don't think it'd be proof positive. All right. And I think one could put forth a pretty powerful argument.
The determination for our neighbors, the reason they got their flood certificate prior to the flooding, they were trying to get to drop their insurance. So it was enough for FEMA to say, you have this flood certificate, you have to, or this elevation certificate, you have to get this insurance. So it's not a binding.
Were they in the floodplain?
They were in the floodway.
So they were in the floodway. If they're in the floodway, they're in the floodplain.
What's interesting, that just was what I was going to say. What's interesting about his property and the other one is the floodplain and fringe, or floodway and fringe, both carry like almost the exact same line. It drops substantially off, so that's why, hence the confusion of like he can go from floodway to nothing just like that, the drop of a hat. There's no distinct line that separates the two.
But the land is pretty flat between the two houses. Us and our other neighbor, it goes uphill.
I think I don't know I haven't seen where you live, but I think I know of your situation.
Also, I called FEMA to ask which zones we were in and if we were eligible for this program and if there was any way that they would allow us to be eligible for this program. And they said, oh yeah, you're in the flood zone. You're in flood zone? Oh, that was their answer to me. So I don't know what O means to you. Nothing.
Oh.
I tried.
I mean, bottom line, flood and elevation certificate. Right now, you're butting up to, adjacent to the floodplain. Technically not in. Elevation certificate might provide a compelling argument that you should be. But is that enough to say you are, and you don't have to do a cost-benefit analysis? I don't know.
Even with a neighboring property at the same elevation that's in the buyout program already.
So the question is, why is the line where it is?
Yes.
But the line is where it is. Until it's moved, you get it. It's an argument to be made, that's all.
It would also be important for him to get from our zoning administrator a SBE determination to also submit with that, because otherwise they got really no way to prove damage.
I'm not sure that properties not in a floodplain can be considered substantially damaged, can they? Because substantially damaged only applies to properties in the floodplain. But this property is technically on the map, not in the floodplain.
Yeah, water.
But
Way more water.
I understand that, but it still is that the substantial damage is applied to properties that are in the floodplain.
But if she talked to FEMA, and FEMA told her she was.
Well, she didn't say that, they said, oh.
Well.
What is a whole mean? I don't know.
It means that you should take a lot of pictures, or took a lot of pictures.
Has your bank required you to carry flood insurance?
In the past.
But now recently? So your bank doesn't believe you're in the floodplain?
We got a letter from FEMA saying that too.
You got a letter from FEMA saying
that we were no longer in the floodplain.
In whatever.
Right. We were no longer required.
So the line shows you're not in. You got a letter from the FEMA that says you're not in, and the bank says you're not in. But you're in an elevation that sustains damage.
Yes.
I mean, that is, in fact, the crux of the problem, right?
And isn't that how the map's generated, is based on their BFE? You know, if their BFE is lower than flood, you know, or if their elevation is lower than that BFE, why wouldn't they be included in that very inaccurate map?
You're probably going to ask the DNR that, because I think the DNR initiates floodplain map adjustments.
Because when we talked to Michelle's staff from the DNR, she said elevation certificate trumps all. If their elevation is lower than the base flood elevation, they need an assessment, etc.
Well,
if they can produce that it's not, then that trumps. You know, so that's kind of the answer we've got from DNR, is it's based on this elevation certificate. And they would be one
So
of
do you have an elevation certificate done?
Everyone's done on Saturday.
Okay.
and they would be on our list B.
Well, if Michelle's staff can convince FEMA that this should be a floodplain property and into the automatic inclusion category, then in fact we have something going. But if Michelle's staff cannot put that in convincing writing to convince FEMA that that's how it is, then in fact we just have Michelle's staff so far saying that.
That seems to be the case with her.
Well, I'm only here to point out the obvious.
Any other questions for Dale?
Yeah, I have one other question. So, are we going to leave, no matter how many of these participants decide to not participate, are we still going to go for 8 properties? So if you said you have 7 that are going to proceed with it, will we be looking to list B and offering that at this time?
No. No. Dale said it'll be at a later date.
But we'll still have 8 properties on our application?
Not necessarily. Let's get to the letter,
So it's not
and
how,
that'll answer some questions.
that's not how I understand it. And
Pete?
one other question.
Is it still possible that FEMA could say, we've got X amount of dollars, but we've got requests for 2 times X, and so Mazomanie, sorry, you don't meet the criteria, you're not gonna get anything?
I think what's going to happen if they have more application than once they have money. First of all, they're going to look at each application and decide how many of these are in the floodway. Okay? Oh, only 3 from this community, 6 are in the floodway. So these 3 for sure are in, and they'll go through. And if they use up their $10 million on floodway properties, they aren't even going to go down to their second level of other floodplain properties that have sustained some damage. So they're going to fund those properties in each individual application that rank highest on their priority list. Follow?
I'm going to make one comment to Natalie's question. 22nd. On the 22nd, you guys voted to absolutely include an alternate if one of the 8 drops out.
If it was recommended by the village, and yes.
That's not how it works.
Well, I don't care. That's the way I understood it.
No, that's what everybody voted on. That was the motion. That was the
Well,
Right, and I
we
think
can
what
we
Dave-
can change that tonight, but we're not discussing this here, Steve.
Okay, but
You can bring that up. You can bring that up in your 3-minute session. Okay.
But I thought Dale said that if they met the criteria of either floodway, floodplain with substantial damage, or, I can't remember what the third one that you listed off, Dale, I'm sorry, but I thought that that would be a shoo-in, you know? I mean, the alternates that we have included have one or more of those criteria.
Well, I would suggest this. Everybody on that original list might want to sign up to be in the application, so that FEMA is funding those X number of properties.
Right, but
Whether
if-
you intend to stay in or not, just to mark a spot.
Well, that's what I'm kind of saying, is if, so then,
But that doesn't, and then after a while, if someone decides to drop out, then in fact someone else can be put in. But I would suggest that people who are offered the opportunity now say yes, even if it's just as a place, a place marker.
well, that's what I'm kind of considering this list B. If you have 7 that say that they're in, why wouldn't we make that offer to the 8 so we leave our application at 8? I mean, that's what makes sense, because they would be the placeholder. You know, if one of those properties
We're getting
chooses
ahead of
not to.
ourselves. That's a board discussion. That's going to come later. Denise, go ahead.
If I go ahead and I say, okay, I accept it, and last minute, and everything gets granted, but I opt out at last minute, and you guys end up being in the floodway or whatever, so does that mean that they can take over my place and do the buyout then?
That would be an option then.
That would be
The
an
village
option.
then would have an option at that point in time.
Okay, so that,
Because they would have the budget and they would have the number of properties approved.
okay,
I mean, we talked about this today, about if
Right.
you could pull out the last minute.
right.
And Denise, that particular property might make sense because there is a bottleneck right there at that area. If they can get included in the floodway and somebody else pulls out of the program, that may very well make sense. This is something Mark has been a proponent of this.
And we have bought some time in order to get this floodway line resolved.
For a family that
By the
actually
time-
desperately needs it instead
Well,
of,
by the time, but we aren't going to get resolved by March 29th.
right.
But it might be by the time it comes up to someone who's in but decides to not stay in.
Right.
But I completely agree with your placeholder statement. I mean, I think that you have to have somebody in there to hold that spot.
Right.
So that we're,
So those 7 that are on the list really need to be in, if nothing else, just to
And then the offer has to be made to one alternate to keep the application at 8.
Not necessarily. We'll get to that with Brian's recommendation.
I think we've already decided that last meeting.
Well, thank you, Dale. Okay, so Brian Berquist can't be with us tonight. Do you have a copy of this letter, Dale?
Great, I do.
Okay. So I'll read this, and this is the engineer's recommendation for the properties to be included. Village staff asked that we prepare a letter report to provide background and rationale for the village's potential flood hazard mitigation efforts as it continues to move ahead after the disastrous August 20th, 2018 flooding event. The August 20 flood caused unprecedented damage and high water levels in much of the Mazomanie area. The floodwaters damaged many structures, including multiple homes and businesses. The effects were so widespread that a federal disaster declaration was made, which opened up several available avenues for funding flood hazard mitigation efforts. These efforts can consist of things like widening and modifying routes that floodwaters take, as well as purchasing properties that impede floodwater flow through the village. In November 2018, preliminary requests for flood assistance were submitted to FEMA from Wisconsin municipalities. At that time, it was projected that $20 million of claims for disaster funds would be submitted at the time of final application deadline, March 29, 2019. A total of only $10 million of assistance is being made available to 7 Wisconsin counties under the disaster declaration and is being limited to, now he's saying being limited to floodway properties only, but should have been a priority. This will require Mazomanie and all other impacted communities to prioritize efforts for this and any future rounds of potentially available funding. Of more immediate need is a decision as to whether the village would pursue property purchase, and if so, which properties would be considered. From a floodplain management perspective, there is a strong desire to prohibit new structures and remove existing structures, homes, fences, sheds, trees, etc., from the floodway. The floodway is an area within the floodplain that contains the highest velocity flow of floodwater. The flood fringe is often at the same water level as the floodway, but with slower velocities. Like in any river, flow velocity in the middle is higher than at the edges. Consequently, obstructions to flow in these high velocity areas have a much greater impact on the elevation of floodwater levels upstream of the obstruction. For this reason, new homes are prohibited and non-residential buildings strictly regulated so as to allow floodwaters to flow through the structure. While many homes and businesses received significant damage during the August 20 flood, FEMA maps show a specific group of homes that are located within or immediately adjacent to this floodway zone. FEMA further allows for flood hazard mitigation funding on properties that have at least 3 separate documented instances of flood loss. Other items that communities often consider when purchasing properties are overall village economics. If significantly more funding was available to purchase all property damaged by the flood, village tax base and utility users are also impacted. Unfortunately, all of these factors have to be considered deliberately and balanced by the village board as it makes its decisions. The attached spreadsheet shows a number of properties that are either eligible or potentially eligible for flood hazard mitigation funds. The properties are segregated by group, with those properties located in the floodway or having a documented repetitive loss having the highest priority for acquisition with which to commence flood mitigation efforts. And then he's attached a schedule, and the high priority properties that he's identified are Nagel, Peterson, Droster, Olson, Hook, Olson, Patsy Hendren, and Craig Booth. Now, Peter has put together a cost for possible acquisition is based on the priority list that Brian Berquist has provided us. And we're only using estimated fair market value off the tax bill, which is typically lower than appraised value. At this point in time, of the 8 properties, the only person who has just definitively said, I don't want to be included, is Michael Droster. And I think there's an element of not understanding the whole thing. So I've been in touch with Village Attorney Bill Cole. The last thing we want is 2 years down the road somebody coming back and saying, why didn't you tell me that why didn't you didn't tell me this? So we're in the process of constructing a disclosure to Michael Droster, not a, you got to do this, but this is your right not to be involved in this. But understand, in your particular case, if you have damage to your home exceeding $3,100 at any time in the future, you cannot occupy that home and you cannot reconstruct that home. So potentially, Droster may be included in this yet. That disclosure is going to be sent to him by the village attorney. But excluding the Droster property, we're going to be applying for somewhere in the range of $1 million, and that doesn't include raising the structures and any other costs associated with this. And Dale, so if we've got $1 million in appraised value in 7 properties, there are going to be other costs that are going to be included in that application.
We have the cost of the appraisals, you have the legal fees on title searches.
Raising the structure?
Raising the structure, right.
So, folks, we're already going to be submitting an app for well over $1 million, and there's $10 million max available to 7 Wisconsin counties. So with that, I'm going to open this to public comment. Again, anybody who wants to speak, just raise your hand. 3 minutes. We're going to keep this orderly.
Board discussion after?
After. Steve.
I just want to make the point again of that last board meeting where it was voted to keep an alternate in. It would also be my assumption that that would carry all the way through to the end, that the board has voted that they want to have an alternate person added to the list, even if it's a year from now. That if somebody turns it down, that you at least make an attempt, a reapplication to FEMA to change the property. I think that would be proper, because I think that's what was voted on, and I haven't heard anything from any other board members regarding this, and that's, I would love to hear that. I'd love to hear what other board members have to say, and what their opinion is on this. And we can, you can wait.
I'll read it back to you, the last sentence in here. To bring the 3 additional properties added to the B list to the engineer and flood consultant for review. It doesn't anywhere in there say that.
Or before that.
Well, this was the amendment to the motion.
No, but you have to read the whole motion.
You have to read the whole motion.
Yeah, I understand, but this was the amendment, so ultimately.
The amendment was that these 3 additional properties added to the B list to the engineer and flood consultant for review. Right. That doesn't say that it's going to automatically happen. It's going to go to the flood consultant and the engineer for review.
No, wait just a minute. This is not going to devolve into a debate. All right? Sue, you put these minutes together, you listened to the tape.
Yes.
What was your understanding?
What was written in the minutes. I mean, I can read them, but that was word for word. Okay, there was a lot of discussion. Then the motion was made, and then you re-explained the motion, and then Natalie had a change.
Gary
She said
cautioned
it
the
wasn't.
rest of the board not to approve that motion.
No,
Right,
I
he
said, I
did.
said I will not
You
support
cautioned
this.
the rest of the board to not approve that,
Okay.
But
which then prompted the
Now,
amendment.
you're using up Steve's time here, okay?
okay, and so what I did for my motion, or what I put in the minutes is what you had said, and then the amendment.
Okay. Steve, wrap it up quick.
So I took the amendment as Dale and Brian would have to be their approval to get those 3 added. But if you read the motion the way it's written prior to the amendment, that motion is saying someone on the alternate list will get on the application if someone else drops out.
Well, we can change that tonight. We can change that with a motion tonight.
Yep.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
We just want to know that it's worth our extra $300 for the certificate, another
Okay.
mortgage payment.
All right, you're talking now.
Yes.
You got the floor. Steve,
Well,
you're
that's
done.
it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for clearing that up.
Yep. Jacob, you want to say something?
I formulated exactly what I'd like to say. Have some time on someone else if they'd like to.
Sure. Anybody else? Yes.
So you granted individuals, Garnett. So you granted Folsom Van Horn residents the ability to modify their home. Yet now, after they've invested money, you're coming through with a proposal to buy the property. It doesn't make any sense.
Well,
that you would grant.
Denise may complete remodeling the home, totally remodeling the home. And an appraisal is made, and she's still got an option to sell. But she's got to have some place to live other than a camper for a year till we wait for the funding. So yes, she should continue on with renovating her home. Because the appraisal is going to be based on pre-flood condition of the home, which she's restoring it to. We can't ask people to sit around and wait for a year in a damaged home. They have a right to reestablish their lives, and so she's doing exactly what she should be doing.
But why are those that aren't able to reestablish not offered a buyout?
Okay.
It's a very selfish list.
There's going to be board discussion, Natalie. This is for public. Go ahead, you can, if you have more to say.
No, I think
Okay.
I think it's just backwards, I guess. So.
It seems that way to me too, but it's how the government,
Yeah,
you
well,
know,
that's a whole other thing.
how they work. Denise, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask what Natalie just asked, so
Go ahead.
why is it that the other people are not offered the buyout that are in need of it?
Well,
Why is it that the only select few down in my area here,
because you're in the floodway, and because
when I
that's.
purchased my home 10 years ago,
Mhm.
I was in the floodplain.
Mhm. But now you're in the floodway.
It's changed, and when a month before the flood storm freak thing happened, I was a fraction of getting out of having to pay flood insurance and everything. All of a sudden, all this happens, and
It's a
now
good thing
it's
you didn't.
blown up out of everywhere. I'm in a floodway. I can't do this. I can't do that. I can't touch my driveway. I couldn't do anything. So I never heard of a floodway until all of a sudden you guys told me, and then you guys are saying that my property has been flooded so many times. This is the first time in 10 years my property has been flooded. So when I bought the property, I was never told that it's been flooded umpteen million times.
Somebody should have disclosed that to you. Anybody else? Yeah, Pete.
In regards to Droster, I think it's important that personal contact be made with them to
Yeah.
explain this rather than just a letter.
Both Peter and I have done that,
Okay.
and
Gotcha.
no, We've talked about it, we're gonna stay. Yeah, but you know, if you go over $3,000, you can't, yeah, I know, we'll have to leave, but
Okay.
it doesn't make sense. Don't try and make sense of it, Pete. If there's no more public comment, go ahead.
How many houses are getting approved for being elevated? And if there are any, is there any like consideration for the impact of the neighbors' houses if there's ever an event like this again?
There are ordinances on the village books that you cannot divert water from your property onto your neighbor's property. Apparently, and Deborah Cinco had that very thing happen to her, and these ordinances were not enforced in the past. They will be enforced this time. Those people that are elevating have an obligation to create a landscaping plan to divert water away from their neighbor's property.
And if they can't?
They have to.
Well, I mean, if they have a real small lot, and you know, my neighbor's house is about 5 feet from my garage, and I don't think he's on the buyout list, so he has to either elevate or he can't move back. And what does that mean for him?
I don't have that answer. I do know that Tracy Johnson is going to be requiring adherence to that ordinance.
If he can't rebuild, can he get added to the buyout list? I mean, it seems...
If he's in the floodway. Floodway.
It just seems unfair that only if you're in the floodway, you're eligible.
But not all these are in the floodway.
Here's the thing. This is based on what our engineer feels the village needs. What the village needs.
Is it
in
the
order
engineer or is it the village?
It's
Is
the
it you
engineer.
guys?
It's the engineer who we're taking our cues from. This is based on what he feels is needed to be done to create an unobstructed path for that high velocity water, which is the floodway. And he's recommending concentrate on the floodway, keep your costs down.
And if people choose not to take the buyout in the floodway, how does that affect the houses around them? Or the plan of the mitigation?
Well, let's talk about this Droster house, for example. It's only a matter of time before that home is going to be damaged again. It's only a matter of time. And the home's going to have to be raised. So eventually, that will be removed from the floodway. And he won't have the value of having been involved in the buyout. He will have a loss at that point in time. And that's what the attorney is going to try and disclose to him.
So in regards to the flood, the waterways, Black Earth Creek,
Yep.
there's debris that's blocked it. Is that the village's responsibility to keep that clean so this doesn't happen again?
Yes.
And how often is that?
Yeah, when is that ever going to start getting cleaned up?
Mark, can you address that?
Post-flood, we relieved any bridge obstructions and major obstructions, but in all honesty, there were lots of items on the front burner that took precedence over creek cleanup.
Right.
Creek cleanup is on the front burner for the spring. Obviously, we can't do it in this weather.
Right.
But there's a plan in place to address it as soon as the weather allows.
Yep. High priority. Dale?
After the 2008 floods, presidential declared disaster, and those floods were in Iowa and Missouri, over a good part of the Midwest. Congress passed a Disaster Recovery Act. And that money was made available to flood-affected communities. And that is where Crawford County received about $400,000 to do channel clearance, maintenance of the channel, clear debris out of the channel. I'm watching keenly a similar disaster recovery bill that seems to be working its way through Congress that is primarily geared to the fires in California, the hurricanes on the coast, but also to include the other presidentially declared disasters in 2018. It was made part of the last-ditch effort before the government shut down, put in by the Republicans to sweeten the pot so some Democrats would vote for it. It is now, it was just in the State Journal last week as being one of the spending bills that's probably going to be attached to what hopefully is a resolution to get past our present financial challenge. So I think there's going to be something coming out here that might deal with, that might make that money available. And this speaks to my comment that this flood recovery is a long-term process, and when you see money popping up that fits into your needs strategy, we jump on it. But we need to be following that all the time. We don't know when it's coming, but when it's there, we grab it. So I think there might be something coming soon to deal with channel clearance.
One last public speaker, Jacob.
I would just like to ask, you are going to clarify 7 or 8 properties tonight? Okay. And in previous conversations with you, you said, should I provide an elevation certificate proving I'm in floodway and or floodplain, that my property would be considered, at least considered. So this is going to be one of the properties you guys are going to be taking full.
You know, I think your property, this is my personal feeling, I think your property makes a lot of sense to be included because you're right at that throat, but you're not in the floodway.
Okay. Well,
at this point in time.
Will an elevation certificate secure that position is what I need to determine, because I'm making long-term decisions for my financial future. I'm paying rent and mortgage. This is a long-term process.
The key is, are you going to be able, with that elevation certificate, to be determined as being in the floodway? That's what's going to enable us to substitute your property for someone else that may not follow through on the buyout.
I've been told with a high degree of certainty from Tony Walker that we will fall within that. So should that be the case, my property is going to be at least a hard look for an alternate.
Well,
would he have to be in the floodway or the floodplain?
Floodplain. But it sounds to me like the floodway is near the floodplain because there isn't much flood fringe there.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
There, Mark has stated this in our meetings with Brian Berquist, that the Wells property makes perfect sense for inclusion.
Yeah, you could expand you could make a large section where the water would flow through there by lowering that property.
And that's what Mark is saying.
Yeah.
That's what Mark is saying.
It's a funnel.
And if you have this disaster recovery money that I was talking about comes through, there's a whole wide range of stuff that to deal with for mitigation there, including additional bio properties that might not have that stringent of a criteria because there's going to be more money there than $10 million.
So I will submit this certificate. We're getting it done Saturday. What other steps can I take at this point? Is there any recommendations from Dale or anybody?
It would be Dale, because if he is fortunate enough to get a floodway declaration.
I'm actually in Madison on Wednesday meeting with Thursday, with Michelle's staff in the afternoon on some other items, and I'll chat with her about what compelling evidence must she have in order to agree to redraw that line.
Okay.
Would that make him the 9th?
No. that would be 8 because it appears Droster isn't.
That doesn't make sense.
I don't see that that's going to happen before the 29th, though. That you're going to, I mean, Michelle's staff can say yes, but then she's going to have to convince FEMA that, in fact, I mean, this is something that I could see being done before, by fall, so that it might take the place of someone else who might not want to be in.
So he would stay on the alternate list.
Stay on the alternate list, or if this disaster recovery money, the big pot of money comes in, which there's support on both sides of Congress to do this. I mean, there's going to be money for these 7 counties.
So the answer, Jacob, is that you could be an alternate.
Okay, so I should stay the course, because I'm considering several options, so, you know what I mean? I'm, you know.
But what would you advise Jacob to do, Dale? Get the certificate?
I would get the certificate, and I think that's the best ammunition you can have to make a case to be included, that the map is wrong, or that there's justification here, even if the map isn't going to be changed, that your elevation suggests that it should have been.
Can I give you my contact information if you get any clarification from staff on this process?
I might, do I have?
No, I didn't. I just sent you the information for those 8 properties.
Now, how would he find
But I don't have any. No.
Where would they go to find record of repetitive damage? Like how you said that they could make a case for
Insurance, flood insurance, FEMA would have record of it.
just based on the parcel number or the address, property.
Natalie, the only one that the village has a record of repetitive damage is the Nago property. We have, now that was before this last flood, so some others might have triggered that in this one. But before that, it's the only one that FEMA was aware of, that the village is aware of a repetitive damage property.
That FEMA as well was aware of?
Right, because they're the ones that tell us, and it's the Nago property.
Michelle's going to say, show me the elevation certificate, and then she'll make the determination. So I think until you get the certificate, Peter will get a copy to me. We'll sit down with Michelle.
Thank you.
Okay, public comment period has ended. We're now in board discussion.
Yes, I have a couple questions.
Go ahead.
So, what consideration has been made if, say, Olson, Hooks, Van Horn doesn't accept this as far as our long-term plan? I mean, that's going to kind of put, they're right in the thick of it, right? So if one of them decides we're not going to do it, how does that affect the long-term mitigation plan of having all of those out of that area?
What Brian has talked to us about is we want to clear that floodway. It doesn't make sense for the village to pick a property a block away that might be in the flood fringe and might be substantially damaged, because if that property is bought, that property can never be built on again. So we've got this hole. We know that at some point in time, somebody may come along, buy a cheap lot, elevate, and build a new home. But if we go out of the floodway, then we're creating these holes around town that can never be built on again. And that's what Brian is saying don't do.
Well, I guess my one concern, and I know that I've kind of preached this before, was Forest S, for example, and I think this is kind of what Bartlett was addressing to. So you have Van Horn, you have Hooks, you have Olson's, you have a village-owned lot, and then you have Forest S. 5 feet away from Forest S, you have Bartlett's place. If Forest S is not offered a buyout, he's forced into an elevation. Now that is the same bad decision that we're making that affected Deborah Zinko by letting Forest S do that elevation and putting that water onto their neighbors. They may not be right in the floodway, but it's floodway, 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 blank village lot, Forest S. So that is the perfect long-term mitigation, which is why we're pursuing those properties. So I just don't understand why we would force them into elevating and becoming a problem for their neighbors when right now we have the opportunity to give them more than one option.
The rationale is that, first of all, that ordinance was never enforced in the past. It should have been. When this house was built next to Deborah Cinco's, that ordinance should have been enforced. I mean, you can do that with landscaping. You can create a swale to bring the water out to the street. Tracy's going to require that.
What if that's not an option for Forsyth?
It's got to be. It's got to be.
Otherwise, you can't raise it.
It's got to be an option.
Well, yeah, but so what if you can't raise it and we're not offering them a buyout? We're just saying, oh, forget it, and we don't have to pay any money for you to lose your house.
Again, that's not in the floodway and not what is being recommended by our village
But there's
engineer.
many on our list that are not in that floodway. And with that in mind, why aren't wolves on the primary list? They're in the floodway.
He doesn't want to be.
Yeah, well, but that's picking and choosing. I mean, we keep
No.
preaching this floodway, but that's not an inclusive to this list.
You mentioned Wolf. He called me just today and he said, you can't offer me enough money. Don't even consider me for a buyout.
Well, I'm hoping that he's staying on the alternate list, so when he says no, it'll go to one of these 3 other people we have intended that for.
Well, the alternate list has nothing to do with what we're deciding tonight. What we're deciding tonight is which properties are going to be included in the application that Dale's preparing.
I thought we already did that.
No, we're doing it tonight. This is the final recommendation from Brian Berquist. Here's the 8 properties. We know Droster isn't participating. He's saying floodway properties.
We voted last meeting to extend these offers to 8 properties.
We did.
And then said if one chooses not to participate, they would be offered to an alternate list.
And
list
we didn't.
B.
And we didn't have this from Brian at that time.
I understand that, but all 3 of the alternates that we had suggested at that last meeting are on Brian's list. And from what Dale said, they all fit the criteria of fitting into this plan. So it's a no-brainer, right? Dale said they fit. They're on Brian's list. Sounds like the alternates are on there.
They aren't in the floodway.
But this is not inclusive to this list. The floodway is not. We voted at the last meeting.
Well,
Can I ask Dale a question?
Yeah.
Dale, what she's talking about, what you said they fit the list, they fit FEMA's list as a possible priority, not the village's engineer's list of running the water through the village through that floodway, correct? Okay.
But why are they on Brian's list? That's what I don't understand.
Which one are you
potential
talking?
Property acquisitions, and all 3 of the ones that we had added are on the list and have substantial damage or will have if they appeal.
But as he said in his letter, the priority are the top 8.
Yeah.
The priority are the top 8 in the floodway.
And we've already voted to offer it to the top 8.
And we have.
And we've offered it to the top 8. So per our vote at last meeting, if Brian and Dale approve of those 3 alternates, they are added to the list, and
No.
we are able to
No.
offer to.
No.
How not?
No.
I don't
No.
understand. No.
Show the floodway. Those are the properties in the floodway that are being offered to be included in the buyout program. Those are the only properties that are directly in the floodway.
And if you look at it, Craig Booth's primary resident is not in the floodway.
You're right, yeah.
And if you look at it, Betsy Nagel's primary resident is not in the floodway.
You're right.
And it had nothing to do with outbuildings when we were doing these assessments or having these discussions. So I have a hard time with you preaching about the floodway when that's not the case, though, that's on this list right here.
Well, again, this is our village engineer, and this is his recommendation.
And it looks like
if you remove these properties, we have a better chance of diverting floodwaters from adjacent residences.
Yes, I think it's already decided as of last meeting what the next step is here. And I really think it, behooves this village board to look at the future. I know that, again, I've been preaching this, but there's been past board decisions that have come back to haunt in the future. Right now, we have a prime opportunity to include, we've decided on 8, and you guys talked about that in the meeting and how that we can sustain that financially. So why would we be backing down from 8 at this point? 8's in the plan, leave 8 in the plan. The 3 that we proposed be added on that alternate list are on Brian's list right here, and they're substantially damaged. So why wouldn't they be offered a buyout if one of the first 8 don't accept?
Because they're not
We've
in the
already
floodway.
voted on it.
Because they're not in the floodway.
The floodway has nothing to do with this list.
Floodway has everything to do
It
with the
absolutely
priority list.
doesn't. So you can't cherry pick here. That's not how it works. They're all in the same. Can you point, Peter? Are you able to point out the 3 additional properties that we voted to have included on List B last meeting?
Was it 4 sets? 4 sets is, I don't have addresses here, is
2018 Hudson.
this
East Hudson.
property here.
Which they are currently not inhabiting.
Right. And
then
the
if it
very
would be
back corner is floodway, the rest is flood fringe, and actually that there's part here that's out of the floodplain completely.
So there is floodway running
So
through their
there-
property.
At the very back corner.
And it's the same thing with, on List B, we have Tices. And it's the same thing with Booths, that a part of it is in that floodway.
Well, Booth's, almost all of it's in the floodway.
But not their primary residence.
Not their primary residence, that's in the solid in the flood fringe. 4th sets is a corner of their house is in the flood fringe, which makes, according to FEMA, the whole house in the flood fringe.
But their proper, there's floodway through their property. Floodway.
The back corner.
Floodway.
Very back corner, yep.
Okay,
Floodway
I
in the
just
back
wanna
corner.
so he's preaching this floodway, that is on their property. And passages?
Passages are over here, they're in solid in the flood fringe, there's no floodway around them. And actually, Brian's got a measurement here. Their floodway is 60 feet away from them.
Substantially damaged and not inhabiting their house. Okay, and what about Wells's?
Wells is right,
Right next to
here,
Hutchinson.
right, and they are not even in the floodplain. They're primary residence. The backyard is in the flood fringe here.
But just so the rest of the board has an idea of what we're looking at here, when we're talking floodway, I understand, and that's what FEMA's ultimate goal is to get those houses out of there. But I think as the village board, we have to understand the ramifications of these actions. If Forsyth elevate, I mean, what does that do to the neighborhood? Wouldn't we rather just offer them the buyout and try to apply for grants for that additional 12%? I mean,
Discussion on the board?
So, let's go through this again. So Dale believes that there's a pot of gold coming up.
I'm an eternal optimist.
Okay. And so we're nitpicking over these 8 plus a possible 6. There's 6 right on here, all right?
no, I'm not the alternate list at the last
So
meeting.
now
Had
you're
2, and then we added 3. Like the
There's
list B had
6. I counted
Tices.
6 right here.
Yeah, but
There's
that's
6.
not the alternate list. List B is
On
only
this?
2 currently.
All right, okay. All right, so these
just saying.
1 through 8, and then these possible 1 through 6 here.
No, those aren't the alternate list. There's only 2 on the alternate list, Tices and Wolves. And we're trying to get 3 additional onto list B.
So that would be the other question. Which list are we talking about?
We're talking about the priority list that Brian is recommending.
And is that
This-
the first 8 right here?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, that's his recommendation.
Those 8. So my question is, we're haggling over the amount of what we're going to do with our alleged $1 million payout. Our debt will be $1 million for those. But there might be more money coming, that all this discussion that we're having right now might be a moot point. Am I right? Am I totally wrong?
I think you're primarily right.
So does it make a difference if we prioritize those people 1 through 6 right now?
But that's not list B. It was presented at the last meeting.
Keep in mind, folks, that our job, and Dale has pointed this out and Brian has pointed it out, our job is to minimize the number of properties we purchase that we're taking off the tax roll and that we're eliminating permanently from our utility rolls.
Well, that comes with my other question. How are you, by offering the buyout to people that are back in their homes, how are you preserving your tax base? They're preserved, they're there, you know? Why wouldn't you be offering it to those that aren't?
And they're in the
and saying
floodway,
that
which is the highest velocity
some are
of
in the
water flow.
floodway, some are in the floodway. But why wouldn't you be offering it to those that aren't in their homes so that they can have a home in Mazo and continue to pay utilities and to continue to be on the tax base? Why would you, I mean, that doesn't make sense to me.
You know, it doesn't.
Those homes that are in the floodway that people have repaired will continue to be housing stock until the cumulative damage of subsequent floods eliminate them. Those properties in the flood fringe, which haven't been repaired, can be ridded of that possibility of forever not being occupiable. They can be brought into compliance.
But not if they're 5 feet away from their neighbor.
By elevation. Well, if in fact they can still conform with the existing ordinance of diversion, yes, they can.
So stop me if I'm wrong, but we are trying to see the future here. We're trying to say we're going to offer these people some money as a potential buyout. They can say no. They could then elevate their property or not, or walk away from it. So really what we're doing right now is we're just trying to get a little boilerplate going that we are applying for money, hoping that these people that were affected would take advantage of that, but we can't force anybody to do anything, right?
I think, listen to what Dale just said. Those properties in the floodway have got limited life expectancy because of future flooding that will take place, and they are going to have to come down at some point in time. We're going to lose that tax base. We aren't going to lose the tax base on the properties in the fringe. That's what it comes down to.
I think we got to look at what we're here for too. Is we're spending people, village of Mazomanie's money. It's not like we have a pot of gold, right? So we're inducing this cost on everybody else in the village, also, right? So those people probably want us to minimize what we do too.
Are you looking for a response from me?
Well,
I think the village is going to support if we support our own. I mean, I think that numerous of us have heard that they're expecting to have to supplement and increase taxes and stuff to try to recover from what's happened. I mean, they're going to have to do it anyways, right?
Not if we can do other
we
things.
We already have to. I mean, we've already said that we're going to have to increase the taxes in order to cover these losses, or our percent of these losses. We just discussed it in finance. I guess to me, if we're going to offer 8, then put in the application for 8. I don't know why we would be faltering at this point. We already made the decision to offer it to these 8 people. So that's already in the process. You already sent them a letter, right, and the follow-up and everything. So now it comes down to what happens when they back out and list B. And I know that I'm going to hammer on it, but these are the people that he just pointed them out. They're in the same exact place as all these other ones that we're buying out. Why wouldn't we include them as at least an alternate? And that would give us 5 alternates, which is what we discussed last meeting.
Well, again, we're admonished to minimize the amount of properties we purchase, to preserve the tax base as much as we possibly can. And what our engineer is saying is these are the properties I would recommend be eliminated from the floodway. So it doesn't have to be 8. We can make application for 7. If one of those if one of those decides not to follow through with the program, I think the Wells property is a perfect example, assuming they're successful in getting their property into the floodplain. I think that makes perfect sense. But the others, no.
How for Seth not? Floodway runs right through their property.
No, it doesn't. It runs on the back corner of their property, and the engineer is saying you don't need it.
Well, he's got them on his list right here.
But they're not in the top.
They're not in the top 8. I understand that. That's who we offer the buyout to.
Right.
But I think we take Dale's advice and we still put in the application for 8, including that placeholder. Why wouldn't we do that?
Are you recommending we?
I think I'm recommending, I was referring to the 7, or, because that one property was not in there, right? Michael
Droster
decides to be in. Otherwise, I got 7 on my list, 8 of it's Droster.
Yeah.
That's what I'm led to understand. I don't know, unless I misunderstand.
We're going to get Droster at some point anyway. For $3,100, he's going to have flood damage, or he'll have a tree limb fall on his roof. Or he'll have a fire. Or he'll want to improve his kitchen.
I don't think this is everything. We're not going to decide everything what's going to happen in Mazomanie tonight with these 2 other properties. I think what he said is down the road we can do other properties and everything else. But I mean, we can't do everything all at once.
I think we've already voted on this.
Les, you look pensive.
I feel like a fish out of water. The people who make the decisions as who's going to be on what list shouldn't come from. I mean, ultimately it comes from us. But we don't have the expertise to decide which property is. You've got a list of 8. Well, who's number 9, and why was 8 and why are 8 and 9 where they are? It wasn't anybody here that made that decision. It was the engineers. And I think if we add or drop somebody from the list, it should be done by the engineers, and the people we're paying to do this are not us. I don't have any expertise, and I don't know anybody at this table that does. So how are we going to decide who should be on the list and who shouldn't?
And I think that's what I motioned and you second, was that we run those 3 additional list B names.
And then we amended that.
And past Brian. No, that was the amendment, but it ran past Dale and Brian.
Well, we can change it. We can change that tonight. We can change that tonight with a new motion. We aren't locked into that motion of last month. We can change it.
Well, I don't
you can change
understand
it with
what's
a new motion.
changed.
Pardon me?
You can change it with a new motion.
Yeah.
But I don't understand why.
Any change in the residences that are designated for whatever position they're going to be put in. I think we need to do that at the advice of our engineer.
No, I agree, and that's why we amended that motion at the last meeting.
And not to say, oh, all of a sudden, well, these are the 3 that you want to add into the alternative list. Well, I don't feel comfortable being the person who chooses what 3 they are. If there are going to be additional residences, additional parcels put into there, it should come from the engineers and not from us.
Well, understood, but the motion we made at that last meeting included those 3 addresses pending approval of Dale and Brian. And they're on Brian's list, and Dale says they meet the requirements of this grant.
You got the next 6 listed here.
But they're not anywhere close to the floodway. That's why those 3 were targeted, is because of their proximity to the rest of the buyouts, the floodway, and substantial damage. That's why those 3 were targeted. There's a million of them with substantial damage. I mean, like you said, it's not a bailout, it's a buyout, right? So we can't offer it to everybody, but we can offer it to those that make sense.
And that's what Ryan Berquist has recommended. The ones that make sense are those top 8. And if Droster is saying I don't want to be involved, then we're dealing with 7.
So we just have to get Droster to be involved to hold the place. I mean, is that what you're saying?
I don't think he's going to agree to that, Natalie. I really don't. There's a definite lack of understanding, which is why I'm having Bill Cole send the letter for that purpose, but also to protect the village from a future lawsuit if somebody comes back and says, you never told me. Is there a motion?
A motion for what? Are you gonna dictate it? So somebody can make that motion?
I have one question.
Yep.
The 8 people on there, we need to submit that list to FEMA shortly? This list hasn't been...
March 29th.
That's what I'm getting at. It has not been submitted to them. And if we drop that from 8 to 7, then just say you drop the $150,000 off the bottom. Does that come off of, that would come off that total $1 million and something? So to knock it down to 900,000. But if you leave the 8 on there just like right now, whether Drosler is agreeing to it or not, you're submitting that money, or submitting those 8 names for that $1,100,000. Am I correct or not, Bill?
In the application,
right.
All those property owners that are included have to sign.
They have to sign on
a letter of voluntary participation.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Right. So right now, if in fact what I'm hearing is true that we only have 7, then I only have 7 voluntary signed participation.
Well, will you wait for legal to approach Drosler and actually explain to him? I mean, that's why I'm wondering why you're calling for a motion when obviously you're saying he needs more knowledge about it and somebody, should lay it out to him.
He's not going to change his mind. The reason the letter is being written is to protect this village from future lawsuit.
Why wouldn't you wait until after he got that, and so he is of 100% certainty aware of his situation?
I suppose he could. I suppose he could change his mind and Dale could include him prior to March 29th if he does it in time. But that's immaterial to what we're talking about here. The recommendation is those 8 properties on the top is what Brian Berquist is saying we need to acquire.
Yeah.
We'll get
Isn't that basically what I said about the 8 properties?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we go with Brian Berquist. What am I trying to say?
Recommendation.
His recommendation on the 8 people there, so we can get submitted to FEMA and get the ball rolling.
But if Droster still chooses not to participate, then we're only dealing with 7. Is that right?
At this moment.
Yes.
As you said, we can change a motion that we did last time or whatever.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay. I have a motion by Ray to
accept Brian
Berquist's recommendation to acquire the 7 properties that have indicated willingness to participate in the program, but to include Droster if he changes his mind prior to the 29th.
Yes.
Second. Now we can talk about it.
We've already made this decision.
Well, we're changing it.
No, we've already made this. Why would we change it?
We're changing it.
But it's ridiculous. Nothing's changed. Why would we change it from 7 to 8 when we're not 100% sure of Droster's response? That if he doesn't, you're saying yourself that he doesn't fully understand it. Why are we've already voted to extend these 8 offers. I don't understand what this vote is for right now.
The vote is to finalize the properties that Dale will include in the village's application to FEMA for buyout money. That's the vote.
May I?
Yep.
Actually, consider this, that we're going to include up to 8 households contingent upon their voluntary participation.
Yep.
I mean, maybe there's only 6 that are going to say, yeah. I mean, and 2 are going to say, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not signing that. Well, then the application is not even 7.
Well, that's what I was referring to before. If, let's say out of these 8, 6 of them decide, yes, I'll do this.
Yeah.
Now, if you have 2 more slots, I think the selection of those 2 more should not come from us. It should come from our engineer. We don't have the expertise to decide who are the next 2 most needy, not needy people, for the mitigation, for the need of the mitigation, which two parcels would be the next two in line.
But based on our conversations with him, he's not going to be recommending any others.
Oh,
He's-
okay.
he's
Then why
rec-
was there a
he's
list B to
recommending-
start? Why was there ever a list B to start? Well, that's not a valid answer, and if he's not here to answer it, then how are we even supposed to ask him?
What he's recommending are the properties in the floodway. That's it. We talked about the Wells property, and he said, no, I don't recommend that be included because it's not in the floodplain. Now wait, but Mark has advocated, and I agree with him, that there's a narrowing of that water flow in there, and that yours would be a logical addition if you can get yourself included in the floodway should someone else not participate in the buyout. Okay?
And that would be included with this application that he's.
No. If somebody chooses not to follow through with the buyout money, we could then.
When would that be?
Well, it would be whenever
They would
someone who's on
change
the
the
list
map.
decides they aren't going to do it.
Yeah, and assuming you get your property into the floodplain. Assuming you're successful in getting it into the floodplain before funds are dispersed.
Technically, portions of our property are already in the floodplain.
Well, you know what, whatever. But you know what we're doing.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Okay.
There's some semantics there.
I just seem like this is like such a bait and switch. Why were we even presented with this B if there wasn't going to be alternates that we were going to offer this to if the primary 8 did not accept? We discussed that at the last meeting. It's in the minutes. So that's just all null and void.
And Brian has come back since then and said the priority should be these top 8.
Well, the priority already was the top 8. That's why we offered them the buyouts. They've always been the priority.
Yep.
They've always been the priority. So I don't understand then what we were even discussing about having an alternate list. If one of these 8, if there is 8, decide not to do it, why is there not an alternate list that we have in front of us that we would offer this to second? Produced by yourself and Peter, or?
Can't we do this a month from now?
Exactly.
But I mean, we can do this 8 right here tonight.
We already decided to do the 8. I mean, that's already done deal, right?
Okay.
Can't you take mine and offer it to somebody else in the floodway or floodplains or whatever?
No. Again, the engineer is saying,
But
stay in the
there's three
floodway.
extra names on that list or whatever, correct? That was that he submitted?
Yeah, why they had an alternate list, I don't know. I wasn't
Well, they did
involved-
have an
I
alternate
wasn't
list.
involved in that conversation that created that.
And we discussed the alternate list.
But Brian is now saying, stick with the priority, clear up the floodway. We've got a motion and a second to have Dale include the 7 parties that are agreeing at this point to enter the buyout program with Droster as a possibility if he changes his mind.
I would implore the board that we could table this until the end of February meeting when Drossler has a chance to know why would we say pending? Why wouldn't we just get the clarification from him, send the letter from the lawyer, and make this decision at next meeting?
45 days from tomorrow is the deadline for the application.
March
And
29th.
I'm assuming Dale has other clients that he's working with, and he needs to get going on this.
We don't submit it March 29th.
Yeah.
Right?
The deadline's March 29th.
Right.
Yep.
So I guess I don't understand what the urgency is at this meeting in particular until we find out for sure from Drossler when legal, explains to him very clearly.
I would seriously doubt that he will participate in the program.
So we're going off of a seriously doubt instead of just tabling this until next meeting.
We don't need to table it. We know of the 7 that there's a motion to include the 7 on the in the application.
But if you figured out all of the financial implications based on 8 properties, why would we not leave this at 8? Why would we not leave this at 8, Dale?
And can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so you said before you have 8 people on this list. To protect those 8 slots, you should have names in 8 of those places with whatever you're going to submit for proof. And FEMA can come back and say, well, we don't want 6, 7, and 8. We're not giving you any money for that. So could you potentially have 9 people on that list and then say that the village caps, this is all we can, this 12.5% is what we've come up with that we can afford for buyout. So we're capping it at this. So if FEMA says, we'll accept all 9 of them, and we look at the list and we say, well, we can't come up with 12.5% to cover all 9 of them, so we can only do 1 through 5. Can we do that? Or if we're submitting a list and FEMA looks at it and accepts it all, is the village then obligated to stick with paying for those 8? You see what I'm saying?
I have seen FEMA reduce the list, but I haven't, on their own, by their own initiative, but I haven't seen FEMA, I haven't seen a community asked to reduce the list, initiate the reduction of the list, and FEMA approving of that.
So basically,
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure that you can submit an application. In the letter you're saying, there is a statement in the application that says, if funded, we have our 12.5%.
Okay.
There's a letter from the village saying that.
So then we would be obligated.
So I think if you're going to put that in there as an application, FEMA's going to say, don't waste our time on a bunch of junk if you aren't going to be able to follow through on it.
But you did say that FEMA doesn't reimburse the village until all monies are paid out. So if we chose not to offer that buyout and didn't pay out that money, we wouldn't be submitting receipts.
But you have a contract to buy those 7 properties then, or 8 properties, or whatever it is.
We can't change our mind then.
When you're approved, FEMA's going to say, all right, congratulations, here's the money, as per your application. Here's a contract, sign it. And that says in 24 months, you will buy these properties you said in the application, and you will have the sites cleared by then, and we will reimburse you 87.5% of the cost to buy these properties.
So what if one of the applicants backs out at that point?
When the applicant backs out, then the project is can be amended, and they would then delete that amount from the
what we were awarded.
From the award.
Further board discussion.
I mean, I'll jump through, I'll put together an application, but the more convoluted it's made, the more difficult it comes, quite frankly, and I would hope that you aren't putting in front of me stuff that isn't real or stuff that you intend to proceed with. All right?
We're trying to make it simple, Dale.
I'm trying to make it, I'm not charging you very much here.
Right. Do we all understand the motion? 7 properties. If Droster changes his mind, we'll add the 8th. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Aye.
Okay, on a vote of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1, Natalie voted in opposition. That motion carries. All right. Moving on to item 3 in old business. Dale, thank you.
You bet. Take care.
Discuss ATV rules. Jeff brought this back because this was not, the ordinance as drafted by Bill Cole was not in line with the recommendation of the Public Protection and Ordinance Committee. And what Jeff has said, do you all have a copy of this?
No, we don't all have copies. No. So, yeah.
The changes Jeff is recommending is one of the items in here, ATVs and UTVs are not allowed to park in or along roadways. taking out the word not. ATVs and UTVs are allowed to park in or along any roadways or alleyways.
Unless it's posted otherwise.
Unless posted otherwise. Okay? So they can park along streets unless it's posted.
So where's that?
Right there.
Oh, right there.
I kind of scribbled in the areas that I understand.
ATV, UTV routes shall be open from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., not closed from sunset to sunrise. On the next page, route signs. And Jeff, I would leave that wording, but I'd add something additionally. The Village Public Works Department shall emplace signage of ATV, UTV routes in accordance with Chapter of Wisconsin Administrative Code. I would, Mark, you want to maintain control of signage placement, I would assume. So the Village Public Works Department shall emplace signage provided by a local ATV, UTV club or clubs.
Do we have a club in mind that's willing?
Yeah, Arena.
Arena's getting Arena Blackbird Crossings. They're forming
Did you want to make notes?
I agree, but in the past, what I've seen in other communities, Mark, is they've actually gone by the regulations and we can tell them where to put them. And they put them up. That we're not using our manpower to do it, to dig the holes, to whatever like that. Is that okay? I mean, obviously it's got to be marked out and where they're digging holes and where we allow them to do it, but we could leave it like what Gary said.
Leave it the way he said
Okay.
it, and we'll work with it when we get to it.
Okay. It's fine.
And then the other change,
the other one's just or
yeah,
temporary
temporary close any or all terrain routes for a
Just
period
add
of 60
another.
days due to emergency complaint or other necessary condition as determined by the village president. That's exciting. I've got these marked up. I'll go over it with you. Is there a motion to make those changes and send it back to Bill Cole?
Yes.
By Ray.
Second.
Second by Natalie. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. That motion is carried. Moving on to new business, item 1, satisfaction of mortgage for revolving loan number 100-147. This would be the revolving loan fund that MSA administers for us.
Okay. Just.
Yep.
Yeah, they paid their
Right, no.
loan off.
I couldn't think of it at first, so.
Motion by Les, second by Ray. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. That motion is carried. Moving on to committees, personnel. Don't need a meeting date. One thing I noticed in Peter's administrator report was you're going to be interviewing lifeguards. You know, last year these lifeguard hirings had to come back to the board. I don't think there's any need for that. If Kathy as pool director, along with Peter and Sue, agree to the hirings, I'd say let them take care of it. Don't bring it back to the board. Let these kids know within a reasonable period of time that they're hired.
I thought that's the way we were going to handle it last year, but then all
It got changed at the board level.
Got
They wanted
changed
to go
back.
through it, yeah, because it had been done that way in the past.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Are you folks okay with that, as long as
Yep.
Sue, Peter, and Kathy? Let's just have that done then. Public Works and Property.
Do you want a motion on that, Gary, or just leave it open-ended like that? Let's make it formal.
All right. Motion by Les.
Second.
Second by Jeff, that Sue, Kathy, and Peter form the hiring committee for hiring lifeguards this year. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And opposed, same sign. That motion's carried. Public Works, nothing. Parks and Rec,
We have a meeting coming up Thursday at 3:30 here. Sue, do you want to post it? Darren Marsh is coming out from the county, DNR, the county, not the DNR, Dane County, and he's going to discuss possible projects in the Mazo area, and I thought it would be nice if we were all on board. So if we post it, anybody can come.
Is Thursday today?
Thursday. Your email bounces back.
My village?
I don't know if Sue's got like 3 names for you.
I don't know, but it's Valentine's Day, so unfortunately I'm not going to be here.
okay. Item 4, Public Protection and Ordinance. We have in here discussion of ordinance concerning users of Highway 14 electric poles. Meeting's gone long enough tonight, guys. Would you be in favor of pushing this off to the next meeting?
Need a motion for that?
No.
Is it like
To
in-depth
postpone it,
discussion?
yeah.
What's the?
To postpone it? Motion to postpone to the next meeting
Yes.
by Jeff,
Second.
by Les. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion is carried. And then Finance,
I do have a question. Now that we're getting these, it always says beginning balance, and there's nothing up there, so I don't know how much was in there.
It's just the way that it prints.
Well, it probably doesn't bother any of us on anything except the cemetery account, which we were trying to watch closely. So if we could have a beginning balance on some of these?
I'd have to handwrite them in. I mean, I can't get them on the report.
The reports, because she's looking at a time period, it starts out at
Does
zero
it tell you how
balance.
much money you have in your account?
well,
You got one of those like accounts, you don't know how much money
It'll be
you
a
have.
completely different report, but then it would have it on there.
no, wait.
I don't-
On a monthly basis, we get from Johnson Block a balance sheet and P&L.
Yeah.
Are all board members furnished that?
They used to be, but they're not anymore. I mean, I can give them to people who want them.
Or how about the last meeting of the month we know? I mean, I don't know. Seems like that we should be responsible and know.
We will start.
We don't need too much information, but I thought that we were working at trying to keep a tab on some of that.
Yep. We'll bring you the financials
Perfect.
in some form.
Yeah.
Is there a motion for payment of bills? So moved. By Les.
Second.
Natalie. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That motion is carried. Any announcements? Not, is there a motion to adjourn?
Yes.
By Ray.
Second.
By Les. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We're adjourned. Longest meeting I've
I'll go down and check this week. There's, should be, there's a little plastic cover there, I just didn't get down to it. I didn't want to go down there with an estimate, we just Saturday and say, you know, just call her out.
Oh, we've been out shoveling all day. Everybody else is, matter of fact, two of our neighbors, he went out and brought out their driveway in front of
All right. I'll let you know when I'm back in town. Yeah. Pretty sure I won't have a problem with that. Really?
good luck if we don't see you.